Close your eyes, let your body sink into comfort, and allow your mind to drift into the corridors of history. Tonight's journey takes us into a time long described as empty, shadowy, and lost, the period we call the Dark Ages. For centuries, this label has evoked images of crumbling castles, empty streets, and 1,000 years of silence. But what if this label hides more than it reveals? What if the story of the Dark Ages is itself a cover-up, a rewriting of memory, crafted to serve those in power? The collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century is often portrayed as the end of civilization. We are told that with Rome's fall, order dissolved, trade stopped, and Europe fell into ignorance. Schools closed, libraries burned, and knowledge itself seemed to vanish. Yet, when we look more closely, the truth is not so simple. There are cracks in this narrative, gaps where light shines through, suggesting that the darkness was not natural, but constructed. Who created the Dark Ages? The phrase Dark Ages was not used by the people who lived through it. It was coined much later, during the Renaissance. Italian scholars in the 14th and 15th centuries wanted to glorify their own age as a rebirth. To do so, they painted the centuries before them as dark, ignorant, and uncivilized. By contrast, their own time looked like a golden dawn. But this raises questions. If the image of the Dark Ages was shaped by people who had political and cultural motives, then how much of what we believe is history, and how much is propaganda? Was the medieval period really so bleak, or was it deliberately framed that way? The phantom time hypothesis. Among the strangest theories is the phantom time hypothesis. According to this idea, parts of history were deliberately forged. German historian Heribert Illig argued that between AD 614 and 911, almost 3 centuries were fabricated. In other words, the year 1000 never existed. It was invented. Why would anyone do such a thing? The theory suggests that powerful rulers, perhaps Emperor Otto III or Pope Sylvester II, manipulated calendars to legitimize their reigns, placing themselves at the dawn of a new millennium. If true, entire kings and battles could be fiction. Stone castles, written chronicles, even coronations might be illusions. While mainstream scholars reject this hypothesis, it reveals something important. The timeline we take for granted is fragile. History depends on documents, artifacts, and the trust that they were recorded honestly. But what if some of those records were altered, or entire centuries manufactured? The possibility forces us to look at the Middle Ages with new suspicion. The silence of the archives. One of the deepest mysteries of this period lies in what was lost. We know the Romans possessed vast libraries. They studied astronomy, medicine, engineering, and philosophy. When Rome collapsed, many of these texts disappeared. We are told that barbarian invasions destroyed them, that fire and neglect consumed knowledge. But sometimes, texts reappear centuries later, preserved in Byzantine vaults or Islamic libraries. Arabic scholars translated works of Aristotle, Galen, and Ptolemy, keeping them alive while they vanished from Europe. Did Europe truly forget, or were these works deliberately suppressed? Perhaps rulers and priests chose which knowledge to erase and which to allow, shaping the intellectual landscape of the future. Imagine the dim light of a monastery scriptorium. A monk bends over parchment, copying one line at a time. Some texts are chosen to survive. Others are erased, scraped clean, overwritten. What truths were deliberately wiped away? Were certain books too dangerous, too disruptive to faith or power, to be allowed to reach the future? Religion and control. During this period, the Church grew into the most powerful force in Europe. With Rome gone, the papacy stepped in to provide order. But with spiritual authority came earthly power. Control of texts, education, and memory itself shifted into the hands of the Church. It is not difficult to imagine that uncomfortable histories, stories of rival faiths, ancient sciences, or forgotten philosophies, might have been concealed. 1,000 years of history could be framed as an age of ignorance not because it truly lacked knowledge, but because knowledge was hidden from the majority. When we hear of the Dark Ages, perhaps what we are truly hearing about is not a lack of light, but the presence of shadows carefully cast. Shadows that obscured truths inconvenient to kings and popes, truths that, if remembered, might have altered the balance of power. The rhythm of lost time. As you listen, let the idea settle slowly in your mind. 1,000 years is a long time. It is long enough for dynasties to rise and fall, for languages to change, for entire cultures to vanish. But what if some of that time is an illusion? What if centuries were compressed, rewritten, or fabricated? Some argue that ancient structures do not align neatly with their supposed timelines. Astronomical calculations suggest discrepancies in medieval records. Even architecture raises questions. Why do Romanesque and Gothic styles seem to appear so suddenly, with little transition? Could this be evidence that time itself was manipulated, that events were closer together than we think? Dreaming through the shadows. As we drift further into this meditation, imagine yourself walking through an abandoned medieval town. Wooden shutters creak in the wind. A cathedral looms above, its spire reaching toward the sky. Yet beneath the stones, secrets are buried. Time feels uncertain here. Centuries blur, history folds upon itself. The Dark Ages were not a single story, but many stories, layered and rewritten. Some were remembered, others forgotten. And perhaps, some were hidden deliberately, forming what may be history's greatest cover-up. Let us continue our slow journey through the shadows of time. As the first whispers of dawn brush the horizon of memory, we step deeper into the mystery of the Dark Ages. The power of the Church. When Rome collapsed in the West, chaos might have consumed the continent. Yet in that silence, one institution rose above all others, the Christian Church. It became not just the guardian of faith, but also the guardian of knowledge, of law, and of memory itself. For many, this provided stability, but for others, it meant censorship, control, and the rewriting of truth. The monks who copied manuscripts were not neutral scribes. They chose what to preserve and what to erase. Pagan philosophies were often condemned. Ancient rituals and traditions were branded as heresy. Even histories of rival kings could vanish if they contradicted the authority of Rome. To control knowledge was to control the very perception of reality. And so, the shadows of the Dark Ages may have been cast by those who sought to define what truth would survive. Suppression of science. Consider the works of ancient astronomers. The Greeks and Romans had advanced theories of the cosmos. Some even speculated that the Earth moved around the Sun. Yet during the Middle Ages, the geocentric model, the belief that the Earth was the center of the universe, dominated. Why? Was it truly because other knowledge was lost, or was it silenced because it conflicted with the teachings of the Church? Centuries later, when Copernicus and Galileo revived the heliocentric model, they were met with resistance. Galileo himself was placed under house arrest for daring to suggest that the Earth orbited the Sun. This suggests that knowledge was not merely absent in the so-called Dark Ages, it was suppressed. The mystery of the missing libraries. Legends speak of vast libraries, the Library of Alexandria, the Imperial Library of Constantinople, the archives of ancient Rome. Time and again, we hear of fires, accidents, and destruction. But is it coincidence that so much knowledge vanished, always at crucial moments in history? Or were some of these losses deliberate? The Library of Alexandria, said to contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls, was destroyed not once but several times. Each time, precious knowledge was lost. But some believe that fragments were not burned at all, but hidden away, removed from public reach. If so, then perhaps the so-called Dark Ages were dark not because there was no knowledge, but because that knowledge was kept in secret. Legends of forgotten technology. Medieval chronicles sometimes hint at devices that should not have existed, strange machines, advanced metallurgy, even hints of flight. Skeptics dismiss these as exaggerations, but what if they were echoes of older technologies, passed down in fragments? Consider the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek device discovered in a shipwreck, capable of predicting astronomical positions. For centuries, no one believed such a machine could exist in antiquity. Yet there it was, evidence of a lost science. How many other inventions might have been hidden, suppressed, or destroyed to fit the narrative of a simpler, more primitive Middle Ages? The hidden histories of peoples. We also hear little of the stories of peoples outside the Church's official narrative. Pagan tribes of Northern Europe, the Celtic traditions, the mysteries of the Druids, all were pushed to the margins, their voices silenced. Their stories were rarely written, and when they were, it was by their conquerors, who painted them as savages. Yet, archaeology suggests a different story. Complex societies, intricate artwork, and advanced farming techniques all point to cultures far richer than their reputation suggests. Could it be that labeling them as barbarian was itself a cover-up, a way to erase competition and legitimize the new rulers of Europe? Time, memory, and control. Imagine for a moment that history is not simply a record, but a weapon. Whoever controls the past controls the present, and whoever controls the present shapes the future. If emperors and popes could rewrite calendars, erase centuries, or choose which texts survived, then the Dark Ages may not be an accident of history but a design. A deliberate blank space carved into time. This idea is unsettling, yet strangely calming. As you drift deeper into thought, imagine centuries of silence stretching before you. Entire generations lived, loved, and died, leaving only faint traces. But perhaps those traces were brushed away not by chance, but by choice. A world beyond Europe. While Europe was said to be in darkness, other parts of the world flourished. In the Islamic Golden Age, scholars in Baghdad preserved and expanded upon Greek and Roman science. In China, printing, gunpowder, and the compass were developed. In the Americas, the Maya and other civilizations built complex cities and observed the heavens. So why, then, does the European Middle Ages seem so empty by comparison? Is it possible that European rulers deliberately framed their own history as a rebirth, erasing the knowledge that they had borrowed from other cultures? By painting their own ancestors as ignorant, they magnified their own role as saviors of civilization. The whisper of forgotten truths. Let your mind wander now, imagining the shelves of a hidden archive, buried beneath stone and dust. Scrolls wrapped in linen. Books locked away in iron chests. Secrets that were never meant to vanish, but were carefully removed from the stage of history. Perhaps, somewhere in those hidden chambers, lies the real story of the Dark Ages, a story not of ignorance, but of concealment. As we sink deeper into the shadows of forgotten centuries, let us turn our eyes to the architecture and art that survived the Dark Ages. Stones cannot lie as easily as men, yet even they carry mysteries. The language of stone. Walk into an old cathedral built in the medieval period. Its walls rise like cliffs of silence. Light filters through stained glass, scattering colors like dreams across the stone floor. Such beauty seems far beyond what we are told was possible in an age of ignorance. How could an era of supposed stagnation produce buildings so enduring, so mathematically precise, so breathtakingly ambitious? The Gothic cathedrals of Europe seem to arrive suddenly, with little explanation. Flying buttresses, ribbed vaults, towering spires, these are not the work of simple masons, but of master engineers. Did this knowledge truly spring from nowhere, or was it inherited from a deeper past, a science preserved in secret and revealed only to chosen builders? The puzzle of sacred geometry. Many medieval structures align with astronomical events. Cathedrals face solstices, churches mirror star constellations, and ancient standing stones are integrated into Christian sites. Was this coincidence, or evidence that hidden knowledge of the heavens survived long after Rome's fall? Sacred geometry, the idea that numbers and shapes hold divine power, was central to these designs. Yet much of it traces back to Egyptian, Greek, and even older traditions. If this wisdom was known, why was it not openly taught? Was it preserved only among secret societies, whispered in the darkness of monasteries, hidden beneath the cloak of faith? The role of secret orders. Stories tell of hidden brotherhoods, stonemasons, the Knights Templar, later the Freemasons, who guarded ancient wisdom. The Templars, in particular, are said to have uncovered secrets beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. When they returned to Europe, they became enormously powerful, almost too powerful for the Church to tolerate. Was their persecution a matter of heresy, or was it an attempt to silence what they had discovered? Perhaps these orders carried fragments of ancient technology, lost sciences, or forbidden philosophies. Their influence on architecture and finance suggests they were more than mere warriors or builders. Could the so-called Dark Ages have been a smokescreen behind which these groups preserved knowledge, passing it quietly through the centuries? Art and hidden messages. Medieval art, too, carries strange messages. In the margins of illuminated manuscripts, grotesque figures and mysterious symbols appear. Were these playful decorations, or secret codes left by scribes who knew more than they could say? Some paintings depict devices or landscapes that do not fit their time. Scholars call them anachronisms, mistakes, or imaginative flourishes. But what if they were memories of things that once existed, now erased from the official record? The brush may have been a safer place to hide truths than the parchment of history. The persistence of myth. Even when written records fell silent, myths endured. Legends of Atlantis, of lost golden ages, of gods who walked among men, continue to echo in folk tales. The Church often dismissed these as superstition, but myths may carry fragments of memory. Could stories of dragons, giants, or forgotten realms be distorted recollections of real events, real creatures, or real civilizations erased from the timeline? Consider the flood myths found across cultures. Why do they echo one another so closely? Did medieval scribes know more about these stories than they admitted? Were certain myths allowed because they could be reinterpreted through religion, while others were suppressed because they contradicted the new order? The silence of women's voices. Another form of cover-up in the Dark Ages lies not in centuries, but in silences. The voices of women are almost absent from the chronicles. Yet archaeological evidence shows that women played vital roles in trade, farming, medicine, and even leadership. Were their contributions deliberately downplayed? By framing history as the story of kings, battles, and bishops, an entire half of society was written out. What secrets were held by midwives, healers, or female scribes whose work never reached the archives? The witch hunts that later swept Europe may hint at a systematic effort to erase traditions of female knowledge, herbal medicine, folklore, and spiritual practices that threatened centralized control. The shifting of calendars. Time itself was manipulated in other ways too. The Julian calendar, introduced by Rome, was replaced by the Gregorian calendar in 1582. This adjustment corrected the drift of days, but also erased 11 days from existence. If time could be shifted so casually, how much more might have been altered in earlier centuries, hidden behind reforms and adjustments? When the Church controlled both the calendar and the narrative, they controlled not only how people prayed, but how they thought of time itself. To erase days was to erase memory. To erase centuries, perhaps, was to reshape the entire world. The dream of hidden history. Picture yourself wandering through a medieval town at night. The market is quiet, the torches dim. Behind shuttered windows, stories are whispered. Some are true, some are lies, and some are secrets too dangerous to tell. History, like the town, is alive, but only a fraction of it is written down. The so-called Dark Ages may not have been an age of ignorance, but an age where light was carefully managed, where the brightest truths were hidden, and shadows were cast to keep them unseen. As the candle of memory flickers, let us turn to another veil of mystery, the great plagues, famines, and catastrophes that haunted the medieval centuries. Were they natural disasters, or do they hide deeper truths about control, power, and secrecy? The Great Plague. The Black Death of the 14th century is remembered as one of history's deadliest events, wiping out perhaps a third of Europe's population. But many questions remain. Some records describe symptoms that do not match the bubonic plague. Others suggest waves of illness that arrived too quickly, in patterns too mysterious. Could there have been other causes, environmental, astronomical, or even human manipulation? The plague reshaped society. Labor shortages gave peasants more bargaining power, while old structures of feudalism began to crack. In this way, catastrophe became opportunity. But who recorded the story, and how much of the chaos was hidden behind silence and myth? Was the plague simply a tragedy, or was it used as a cover for deeper restructuring of society? Famines and the sky. Throughout the Dark Ages, records of famines appear again and again. Crops failed, winters grew harsher, and strange events in the sky were recorded. Chronicles speak of comets, eclipses, and fiery signs above Europe. Were these merely natural phenomena, or did they signal environmental changes far greater than we understand? Some scholars point to volcanic eruptions that may have plunged the world into sudden cooling. Others whisper of cosmic events, impacts, dust veils, or even deliberate suppression of astronomical knowledge. Imagine living in a village where the sun disappeared for months, the sky turned red, and hunger gnawed at every door. Such memories would echo through centuries as stories of divine punishment. But perhaps they were the echoes of events hidden from us in the neat pages of history. The Church and fear. Fear was a powerful tool in these centuries. When disasters struck, the Church often framed them as punishment for sin. By tying catastrophe to morality, they reinforced their authority. People were told to pray, to repent, to obey. Could some events have been exaggerated, or even invented, to strengthen this grip? We cannot know for certain. But what we do know is that memory of disaster is never neutral. It can be shaped, retold, or silenced. And in the Dark Ages, when most people could not read or write, those who controlled the chronicles controlled the truth of catastrophe. The mystery of alchemy. Alongside famine and plague, there existed another hidden current, alchemy. Officially, alchemy was dismissed as superstition, the dream of turning lead into gold. But beneath the surface, it was something more. It was a coded language of transformation, physical, spiritual, and perhaps even technological. Alchemy preserved fragments of ancient science. It hid them beneath symbols, metaphors, and secrecy. Why such secrecy? Because open exploration of these ideas might have clashed with religious dogma. To survive, knowledge had to disguise itself as myth. In this way, alchemy may have been one of the hidden bridges between the ancient world and the Renaissance. The hidden healers. Medicine in the Dark Ages is often portrayed as primitive, leeches, herbs, and prayers. But hidden within folk traditions were vast bodies of knowledge. Herbal remedies, midwifery, and natural cures survived in whispers. Many of these were carried by women, passed through generations. Later, when witch hunts swept Europe, these traditions were demonized, destroyed, or driven underground. Could it be that the so-called ignorance of medieval medicine was partly manufactured? That knowledge was deliberately delegitimized to centralize authority in the hands of universities, monasteries, and sanctioned doctors? The persecution of healers may itself have been a cover-up, a way to erase knowledge that did not fit the official narrative. The voices that were silenced. Throughout this time, countless voices were lost. The poor, the enslaved, the conquered, their stories rarely made it into the chronicles. Instead, we hear only the voices of kings, bishops, and nobles. This silence is itself a cover-up, not of conspiracy, but of neglect. By erasing the experiences of ordinary people, history becomes skewed toward the powerful. What did a peasant truly think of his lord? What did a woman healer pass on to her daughters? What stories were sung around fires that never reached the parchment? These silences shape our understanding as much as the words that remain. the persistence of light. And yet, even in the deepest night, sparks remained. In monasteries, monks illuminated manuscripts with gold leaf, creating pages that still shine centuries later. In villages, storytellers passed down legends of heroes and gods. In Islamic Spain, scholars translated Aristotle and Euclid. In faraway lands, knowledge flourished while Europe called itself dark. Perhaps the greatest cover-up of the Dark Ages is not that knowledge vanished, but that it survived in places we were not taught to look. By calling Europe's centuries dark, we hide the light that glowed elsewhere, and the connections that truly shaped our world. Drifting deeper. As you rest, imagine those hidden lights, a monk's candle in a silent library, a healer's whispered remedy, a star chart traced in ink on fragile parchment. They remind us that history is not only what is written, but also what is forgotten. And sometimes, what is forgotten on purpose. The Dark Ages, then, may be less a time of ignorance and more a time of concealment. 1,000 years of shadows, shadows that still stretch into our present. As we move further into the labyrinth of history, the shadows lengthen and the mysteries deepen. We now turn our gaze to the chronicles themselves, the written words that have survived from the so-called Dark Ages. For in the very act of writing, of choosing what to preserve and what to omit, we may glimpse the fingerprints of a cover-up. The problem of the chronicles. Most of what we know about early medieval Europe comes from chronicles written in monasteries. These texts were not neutral accounts. They were shaped by the worldview of monks, who saw history as a stage for divine punishment and divine reward. Natural disasters became signs of God's wrath. Victories were framed as miracles. Defeats were explained away as the sins of kings. But what if these chronicles are not simply biased, but curated? Entire decades pass with barely a mention. Whole peoples vanish from the record. Why? Perhaps because to write them down would give them legitimacy. Silence itself may have been a form of erasure. The missing empires. There are hints of powerful kingdoms that vanish from the page. Some evidence suggests that early Slavic states, Celtic communities, and northern tribes may have been more organized than we are told. Yet they appear only briefly in chronicles, often dismissed as barbarians. Could this be another form of suppression, erasing complex societies to maintain the image of a Europe in need of salvation by Rome and the Church? The Byzantine puzzle. Meanwhile, in the East, the Byzantine Empire preserved much of Rome's legacy. Its libraries, art, and learning survived for centuries. And yet, Western narratives often reduce Byzantium to a footnote, a decadent empire slowly crumbling. Why is its story told so faintly? Perhaps because its survival challenges the idea that Rome's fall plunged the entire world into darkness. To acknowledge Byzantium fully would mean admitting that civilization had not collapsed. It had simply shifted. The Islamic Golden Age. While Europe described itself as lost, the Islamic world blossomed. In Baghdad, scholars built the House of Wisdom, translating Greek texts and expanding upon them. They studied medicine, optics, mathematics, and astronomy. Algebra was developed, medical encyclopedias compiled, and stars charted with precision. Why, then, does the narrative of the Dark Ages focus so little on these achievements? Perhaps because to do so would reveal that Europe was not the center of progress. The idea of a rebirth during the Renaissance becomes less convincing if one admits that knowledge had continued elsewhere, uninterrupted. The role of translation. When European scholars finally encountered Arabic texts centuries later, they often claimed the knowledge as their own rediscovery of Greece and Rome. Yet in truth, much of it came through Arabic translations and commentaries. By downplaying this connection, Europe could claim its rebirth as a miracle, not an inheritance. Could this erasure be considered another cover-up, designed to conceal how much Europe owed to other cultures? The silence of the North. In Scandinavia, the sagas tell of voyages across the seas, of encounters with strange lands, even of journeys to North America centuries before Columbus. For a long time, these stories were dismissed as myth. Only in the 20th century did archaeology confirm Viking settlements in Newfoundland. Why was this knowledge ignored for so long? Because it contradicted the official narrative of discovery. To admit that medieval sailors had crossed the Atlantic was to admit that history was far more complex than the textbooks allowed. The erasure of the pagans. The conversion of Europe to Christianity was not a simple, peaceful process. Pagan temples were destroyed, sacred groves cut down, idols smashed. Yet the chronicles often describe this transition as swift and inevitable. In reality, pagan traditions survived for centuries, woven into local festivals, songs, and rituals. Why then does official history insist on portraying Europe as fully Christian long before it was? Perhaps because acknowledging the persistence of older faiths would undermine the Church's narrative of authority. The question of continuity. Archaeology tells a different story than the chronicles. Pottery styles, farming tools, and settlement patterns suggest more continuity between Rome and the Middle Ages than the written sources admit. If peasants continued their lives much as before, then the collapse may have been more political than cultural. By emphasizing a dramatic break, chroniclers could magnify the role of the Church as the savior of civilization. The fabric of time. Once again, we return to the question of chronology. How reliable are the dates assigned to events? Were some wars duplicated in the record, retold under different names? Were some rulers exaggerated, their reigns stretched across decades to fill gaps? Scholars who question the timeline point to strange overlaps, suspiciously similar events, and astronomical records that do not align. Could time itself have been woven like cloth, with patches and seams hidden in the darkness? The drift of memory. As you listen, imagine a vast library where scrolls are scattered, some intact, some torn, some rewritten. A monk gathers them, decides which to copy, which to burn, which to alter. That moment of decision shapes centuries of memory. And you, living now, inherit his choice without ever knowing it. The Dark Ages may not be dark because they lacked light. They may be dark because the light was redirected, bent, filtered, until only certain beams reached us. The cover-up may not be a single act, but 1,000 small acts of silence, omission, and rewriting. Drifting through forgotten pages. Picture a book where entire chapters are missing. You turn the pages, and suddenly centuries are gone. The story feels complete, but in truth it is fractured. This is how history often appears to us, whole, yet broken. The Dark Ages may be that missing chapter, not because nothing happened, but because too much happened that was never meant to be remembered. As we drift further into the dim corridors of history, we find ourselves not only questioning what was recorded, but also what was deliberately hidden. For every written page that survived, there are countless voices that were silenced, countless memories erased. Tonight, we look deeper into the structures of power, the legends that persisted despite suppression, and the strange shadows that still haunt the story of the Dark Ages. The control of memory. History is never simply a reflection of the past. It is a tool, a weapon, shaped by those who hold power. In the centuries after Rome's fall, the Church and emerging monarchies understood this well. By controlling education, calendars, and chronicles, they controlled not just what people thought, but how they thought. The peasant who could not read was told stories through sermons and stained glass. The noble who could read was given texts shaped by the hand of the scribe. Even time itself was measured by bells that rang not to mark hours of work, but hours of prayer. To control memory was to control the world. The vanishing cities. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of cities that thrived in late antiquity, only to vanish suddenly from records. Prosperous trade routes that connected Europe to Asia appear to collapse into silence. Yet in some cases, ruins reveal that life continued, though differently. Why do the chronicles fail to mention them? Perhaps because they were outside the sphere of church influence, too independent, too resistant to control. Their omission may not be an accident, but a choice. The legend of the hidden kings. Throughout Europe, legends speak of kings who will return. Arthur in Britain, Barbarossa in Germany, and others across the continent. These stories suggest that the memory of powerful rulers was never truly erased, only transformed into myth. Could it be that some of these figures were deliberately removed from history, their reigns rewritten or reassigned? A king too dangerous to the official narrative might be easier to control as a legend than as a fact. The guardians of forbidden knowledge. In monasteries, knowledge was not only preserved but also locked away. Certain texts were considered too dangerous for common eyes. Books of astrology, alchemy, or ancient philosophy were chained to shelves or hidden in secret archives. Even today, whispers circulate about the Vatican Library, said to hold volumes never revealed to the public. What truths lie in those sealed chambers? Perhaps evidence that challenges the official timeline. Perhaps accounts of ancient civilizations more advanced than we imagine. Perhaps forgotten gospels, histories, or sciences that would reshape our understanding of the past. The shadow of heresy. When individuals dared to challenge authority, they were branded heretics. Some of these heresies survive in fragments: the Cathars, the Bogomils, the Gnostics. They spoke of different cosmologies, different paths to truth. Their destruction was violent, and their books were burned. But was their suppression only about faith? Or did they preserve knowledge that threatened the monopoly of the Church over history itself? Imagine the bonfires where manuscripts turned to ash. Each page lost was another voice silenced, another possibility of history erased. What we know today is shaped by those flames. The hidden sciences. While Europe was said to stumble in ignorance, there are clues that advanced sciences survived in secret. Medieval maps depict lands that should not have been known, Antarctica drawn centuries before its discovery, coastlines too accurate for the technology of the time. How could this be? Some argue they were based on ancient charts, preserved by sailors or secret orders, hidden from the general population. Even knowledge of electricity, magnetism, and mechanics appears in scattered hints. Strange devices are described in chronicles, perpetual motion machines, talking heads, even flying contraptions. Officially, these are dismissed as fantasy. But what if they were remnants of a deeper tradition, suppressed because they contradicted the desired image of a primitive age? The architecture of mystery. Many medieval buildings still puzzle modern engineers. How were massive stones lifted without modern cranes? How did builders achieve such precise acoustics in cathedrals? Some suggest lost technologies of sound, resonance, and geometry were at work. These secrets may have been passed within guilds, never written, deliberately concealed from outsiders. The secrecy of builders is itself telling. Knowledge was guarded through oaths, symbols, and rituals. Only initiates could access it. Perhaps because open knowledge was too dangerous in a world where questioning the official narrative could mean death. The myths of the otherworld. Folk tales from the Dark Ages often speak of hidden realms, underground cities, and beings that lived beside humanity. Elves, fairies, and dwarves are today seen as superstition, yet their stories often involve secret knowledge, hidden treasures, and forgotten technologies. Could these myths be distorted memories of real peoples, real traditions, deliberately erased and remembered only through legend? The persistence of such myths suggests they carried meaning too important to vanish. Even as chronicles ignored them, the people remembered. Oral tradition became the counter-history to the official record. The role of dreams and prophecy. In a world where official knowledge was restricted, people turned to dreams, visions, and prophecy. Medieval Europe was full of prophets who claimed to see beyond the veil of time. Some were condemned, others quietly absorbed into the church. Why did these visions matter? Because in them, the suppressed truths of the past may have re-emerged, clothed in the language of the future. The fragmented timeline. As we piece together this puzzle, the timeline itself grows unstable. Some scholars suggest that battles described in different centuries appear suspiciously similar. Certain rulers seem duplicated, their deeds recycled. Could it be that history was compressed, stretched, or rewritten to fit the needs of rulers? If so, then the Dark Ages may not only hide knowledge, but also hide time itself. A meditation on silence. Close your eyes now and imagine the silence of a medieval night. No hum of machines, no glow of screens, only the faint flicker of firelight and the toll of distant bells. In that silence, memory could be reshaped, stories retold, truths buried. The Dark Ages may be less about ignorance and more about control, 1,000 years in which light was hidden, not extinguished. The continuing mystery. Even now, the cover-up may not be over. Each generation inherits the history given to it, rarely questioning who wrote it or why. Archives remain sealed, ruins unexplored, and myths dismissed. But perhaps the truth still waits, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those who dare to see. As you drift deeper into thought, imagine history not as a single story, but as a palimpsest, a manuscript scraped clean and written over, yet with traces of older words still faintly visible beneath. The Dark Ages may be that palimpsest, 1,000 years overwritten, but not entirely lost. If we listen carefully, we may still hear the whispers of what was meant to be forgotten. As we move still deeper into the shadows of history, the veil becomes heavier, and yet, paradoxically, more transparent. For the longer we look at what is missing, the more the gaps themselves begin to tell a story. Let us now wander into the realms of myth, legend, and the strange enigmas that cling to the centuries we call dark. The persistence of myth in a silent age. While official chronicles reduced entire centuries to a handful of dates and names, the common people continued to tell their stories. Legends of lost lands, vanished heroes, and strange visitors circulated across Europe. These tales were not preserved in ink, but in song and ritual. They were never considered history by the church, but they survived because they mattered to the people. Think of the Arthurian legends, tales of a king who would return, of a magical sword, of knights who quested for a hidden grail. Official historians treated these as fantasy, yet their persistence suggests they carried echoes of real events, distorted by time. Was Arthur an erased king, deliberately removed from the record? Was the Grail a symbol of knowledge suppressed, kept alive only in allegory? Giants, monsters, and forgotten peoples. Medieval chronicles sometimes describe encounters with giants, strange races, or monstrous beings at the edges of the known world. Today, we interpret these as exaggerations or metaphors. But what if they were half-remembered truths? Excavations across Europe have revealed burial mounds larger than ordinary human scale, skeletons that seem abnormal, and artifacts that do not fit neatly into the official record. Could tales of giants and monstrous peoples be the distorted memories of cultures deliberately erased? To call them monsters was perhaps a way of stripping them of legitimacy, ensuring they would be remembered only as myths. The strange case of advanced knowledge. Again and again, medieval texts hint at knowledge that should not have been available. Maps showing lands across the Atlantic. Stories of machines that move without beasts. Even descriptions of strange lights in the sky. Each of these is easy to dismiss in isolation. Together, they suggest fragments of a suppressed tradition. Some believe ancient civilizations left behind a legacy of advanced knowledge, in stone, in symbol, in oral tradition. If so, then the Dark Ages may have been a time when such knowledge was actively concealed, surviving only in scattered clues that escaped suppression. The role of prophecy. Prophecy played a central role in medieval thought. Figures like Merlin in legend, or Hildegard of Bingen in reality, were said to see visions of the future. Some of these visions described events centuries ahead, with uncanny accuracy. Were these simply spiritual experiences, or could they have been coded ways of preserving suppressed truths? Prophecy may have served as an alternative channel for memory. When a story could not be told as history, it could be framed as vision. In this way, fragments of forbidden knowledge might have been hidden in plain sight. The ghosts of lost civilizations. Whispers of Atlantis, Hyperborea, and other lost lands filtered through medieval thought. Mariners spoke of islands that appeared and vanished, of strange peoples across the sea. Official history treated these as fantasies. Yet, archaeology has shown that civilizations far older than Rome once thrived. In Mesopotamia, in the Americas, in Asia. Could traces of these civilizations have survived into the Middle Ages, only to be deliberately ignored by chroniclers who sought to portray Europe as the center of all things? The mysteries of language. Languages carry memory. In the Dark Ages, Latin became the official language of knowledge, while local tongues were dismissed as vulgar. Yet in those local languages, songs, proverbs, and myths preserved older truths. The suppression of native tongues may itself have been a cover-up, a way to ensure that only one version of history survived, written in Latin by the hand of the Church. Some words in European languages trace back to concepts we barely understand today, suggesting ancient traditions hidden in plain sight. Folklore studies often reveal astonishing continuity between pre-Christian rituals and medieval festivals. By labeling them as pagan superstition, the Church attempted to erase them. But language, stubborn and enduring, carried them forward. The architecture of silence. Many medieval buildings contain hidden symbols, carvings tucked into corners, patterns in stone that suggest deeper meaning. Some churches feature zodiac signs, green men, or other figures that have little to do with Christian doctrine. Were these remnants of older traditions smuggled into official spaces? Builders often left coded signatures, marks that indicated membership in secret guilds. These guilds may have preserved ancient knowledge about geometry, astronomy, and natural forces. To the casual eye, they are decorations. To the initiated, they are messages. The long night of witchcraft. Later centuries saw the witch hunts, but even in the early medieval period, there were suspicions of hidden practices. Women, especially, were said to carry forbidden knowledge of herbs, healing, and midwifery. By branding this knowledge as witchcraft, authorities could delegitimize and destroy it. This was not simply a war on superstition. It was a systematic erasure of knowledge that existed outside official control. How much wisdom vanished in those flames? We may never know. But each witch trial, each accusation, was perhaps not only a social act, but also a deliberate attempt to silence alternative sources of truth. A world larger than remembered. It is worth remembering that while Europe called itself dark, the world was vast and alive. In Africa, empires like Mali and Ghana thrived, trading across the Sahara. In the Americas, civilizations observed the stars and built cities of stone. In Asia, dynasties rose and fell, their chronicles rich with detail. Why, then, does the official story of the Dark Ages so often ignore these worlds? Perhaps because to acknowledge them would undermine the narrative of Europe as the eventual savior of civilization. By erasing or minimizing these cultures, the illusion of darkness was easier to maintain. The whisper beneath the silence. Close your eyes and imagine the Dark Ages not as an empty void, but as a crowded room where voices have been muted. The silence is not natural. It is imposed. Beneath it, whispers remain, in myths, in ruins, in half-forgotten songs. If you listen carefully, you can still hear them. The greatest cover-up of the Dark Ages may not be one grand conspiracy, but 1,000 small acts of suppression. A book burned here, a voice silenced there, a tradition labeled as superstition, a century stretched or erased. The result is a story we call history, but which is in truth only a fragment of what once was. As our journey continues, the shadows of the Dark Ages grow denser, yet in that very darkness, patterns begin to emerge. It is not only events that vanish, but also entire ways of thinking, entire structures of reality. To understand the cover-up, we must look not only at lost knowledge, but at how truth itself was redefined. The control of time and space. When Rome collapsed, calendars fractured. Different kingdoms kept different measures of time. Festivals were aligned with harvests, moons, and local traditions. But as the Church rose, it sought to unify all of Europe under a single system, the liturgical calendar. This was more than convenience. To restructure time was to restructure memory. Days were renamed after saints, pagan festivals rebranded as Christian holidays, solstice rituals transformed into holy days. In this way, the very rhythm of life was rewritten. What once connected people to the cycles of nature now connected them to the authority of the Church. Space, too, was redefined. Ancient sacred sites were demolished or built over. Temples became churches, groves became cathedrals, wells became baptistries. To walk through medieval Europe was to walk through layers of overwritten memory. Each stone carried both an ancient truth and its Christian replacement. The politics of forgetting. Forgetting is not always an accident. It can be deliberate. By erasing inconvenient histories, rulers shaped the narrative of legitimacy. Conquered peoples were written out of chronicles. Defeated kings were described as wicked. Lost battles were ignored altogether. Take, for example, the history of the Celts. Before Rome, they dominated much of Europe. By the Middle Ages, they were remembered mostly through the lens of myth and legend. Their intricate art, advanced metallurgy, and complex societies were minimized. Why? Because to acknowledge them would challenge the authority of both Rome and the Church. Forgetting them was political. The invention of the Middle Ages. The very idea of a Middle Ages, a long stretch between antiquity and modernity, was an invention of later historians. It framed history as a journey from darkness to light, with the Renaissance as salvation. But if we question this framework, we see how artificial it is. The so-called Dark Ages may not be a bridge between two worlds, but a world of its own, deliberately minimized to glorify what came after. The mystery of lost inventions. Scattered across medieval records are references to inventions that seem centuries ahead of their time. Reports of flying machines, mechanical clocks, even automata that walked and spoke. Most of these are dismissed as fables. Yet archaeology occasionally confirms them. Fragments of gears, intricate tools, designs hidden in manuscripts. Could it be that many technologies were invented earlier than we think, but suppressed or forgotten because they disrupted existing power structures? A machine that replaced labor would have threatened lords. A discovery that contradicted doctrine would have threatened the Church. Suppression was safer than acceptance. The hidden hand of secret societies. We return again to whispers of hidden brotherhoods. The stonemasons, the Templars, the early Rosicrucians, all accused of guarding forbidden knowledge. Whether these accusations were true or not, the fear of them reveals something important, that many believed knowledge was being hidden. The very idea of secret societies implies that the surface of history is incomplete, and that beneath it lies another current. Could these societies have been the true custodians of ancient science, passing it through symbols, rituals, and architecture? If so, then much of what we call the Renaissance may simply have been the unveiling of secrets kept alive in the so-called Dark Ages. The shadow of censorship. Books were rare and precious in the Middle Ages. To control a book was to control thought. Censorship was not only the burning of texts, but the quiet refusal to copy certain manuscripts, the slow starvation of ideas. A book that was not copied simply ceased to exist for future generations. In this way, History was curated not by violence, but by neglect. How many books were allowed to fade into dust because they did not serve the narrative of the powerful? How many truths perished, not in fire, but in silence? The global silence. Europe was not alone in shaping its history. Across the world, powerful empires also rewrote memory. Dynasties in China erased their rivals from the record. Conquerors in the Americas destroyed the codices of earlier civilizations. Everywhere, power sought to control not only the present, but also the past. This suggests something profound, that the Dark Ages may not be a uniquely European phenomenon. They may be part of a global pattern, a universal instinct of rulers to hide inconvenient truths and glorify themselves. The psychology of darkness. Why call an age dark? Perhaps because darkness frightens us, and in fear we accept authority. If the past was dark, then we need guides, saviors, enlighteners. By painting the Middle Ages as ignorant, later powers justified their own role as bringers of light. Darkness, then, is not a description of reality, but a strategy of control. A meditation on what is lost. Pause now, and let your mind drift. Imagine an endless library where shelves stretch beyond sight. Some books are whole, some are missing, some are burned. You reach for a volume, but the pages crumble in your hands. You search for another, but it has been replaced by a blank. This is the library of history. Its gaps are not empty, they are full of meaning. What is lost tells us as much as what is preserved. The silence of women, the erasure of pagans, the neglect of peasants, the minimization of other civilizations, all are part of the great cover-up. Together, they create the illusion of darkness, the dream of the listener. As you listen, let yourself imagine walking through a ruined monastery. Stones are broken, walls collapsed, yet faint traces remain, a carved star, a hidden word, a fragment of music echoing through the air. These are the whispers of what was not meant to survive. They remind us that even in the deepest cover-up, fragments of truth endure. The Dark Ages, then, may not be a time without knowledge, but a time when knowledge was hidden behind veils. Veils we can still lift, if we dare to look closely enough. As we move ever further into the mists of the Dark Ages, we find ourselves circling closer to the heart of the mystery. Not only what was lost or hidden, but why it was hidden at all. If there was truly a cover-up, then we must ask, who benefited from the darkness? The power of the narrative. Every society tells stories about itself. These stories shape identity, justify authority, and create continuity. After Rome's collapse, Europe was fractured into countless kingdoms and tribes. The Church stepped forward with a unifying story. The world had fallen into sin, but salvation could be found through obedience. To reinforce this, history had to be rewritten. The Roman past was painted as both glorious and corrupt. Pagan traditions were vilified. Whole centuries were made to appear empty so that the Church's role as guardian of civilization seemed more necessary. Darkness was not simply described, it was imposed. The hidden economies. Trade did not vanish in the Middle Ages. Archaeology shows goods moving across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Coins minted in one land appear thousands of miles away. Yet the chronicles are strangely silent about many of these connections. Why? Perhaps because acknowledging thriving trade undermined the narrative of collapse. Silk from China, spices from India, gold from Africa, all reached Europe through networks that were carefully controlled. By hiding the extent of this commerce, rulers could present themselves as the sole gatekeepers of wealth. The darkness, in this case, concealed not absence but abundance. The war on memory. When conquerors arrived in new lands, they often destroyed not only armies but memories. Temples were razed, monuments defaced, oral traditions suppressed. This was not mere conquest, it was the shaping of reality. By erasing the past of others, conquerors ensured that their own story became the only story. We see this in the Christianization of Europe, in the erasure of pagan gods, in the burning of sacred groves. We see it again in the Americas centuries later, when codices of the Aztecs and Maya were burned. The Dark Ages, then, may not be one unique cover-up, but part of a larger pattern: the systematic control of memory by those in power. The manipulation of fear. Fear was a powerful tool in the Dark Ages. Fear of sin, fear of heresy, fear of the unknown. Rulers used fear to maintain order. By portraying the world as dangerous and chaotic, they justified their own authority as protectors. This fear extended to knowledge itself. Astrology, alchemy, and alternative philosophies were treated as dangerous, not only because they challenged doctrine, but because they gave people power outside the control of the Church. To maintain authority, knowledge had to be restricted, feared, even demonized. The strange lights in the sky. Medieval records occasionally describe strange phenomena in the heavens: fiery crosses, glowing wheels, luminous clouds. Some of these may have been comets or auroras. Others defy easy explanation. Were they natural? Were they symbolic inventions by chroniclers? Or were they memories of something else entirely? Encounters or events that could not be explained within the worldview of the time. The silence that follows these reports is often louder than the reports themselves. A strange event is mentioned once, then never again. Perhaps because it was forgotten. Or perhaps because it was deliberately hidden. The shadow of the unknown. One of the most puzzling aspects of the Dark Ages is how often the chronicles say nothing at all. Decades pass with no events recorded. Entire peoples appear suddenly, as if from nowhere. Was this simply poor record-keeping? Or was it the deliberate compression of time, an editing of history to serve a purpose we no longer see? Imagine if 3 centuries were fabricated, as the phantom time hypothesis suggests. Imagine if rulers inserted themselves into invented history, creating false continuity. If this is true, then our very sense of time is built on a lie. The sacred and the forbidden. Religion in the Middle Ages was not only faith but politics. To question doctrine was to question authority. And so, many questions were forbidden. Could the earth move around the sun? Could other worlds exist? Could ancient wisdom rival scripture? By declaring such questions heretical, rulers controlled not only what people thought, but what they were allowed to imagine. This suppression was not ignorance, but strategy. It ensured that power remained concentrated in the hands of the few. The world beyond the walls. And yet, beyond the walls of Europe, knowledge thrived. In Africa, the libraries of Timbuktu preserved thousands of manuscripts on astronomy, medicine, and law. In the Islamic world, scholars calculated the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy. In Asia, technologies like printing and gunpowder were developed. Why does the story of the Dark Ages so often ignore these achievements? Perhaps because to admit them would undermine the myth of European rebirth. Darkness had to be maintained, even if it was false. The echoes that remain. Despite the suppression, fragments of truth survived. Myths, ruins, songs, and symbols all carried echoes of what was lost. Even today, archaeology continues to reveal traces of forgotten histories. Each discovery reminds us that the official story is incomplete. The cover-up, then, may not have been perfect. Shadows may hide the light, but they cannot extinguish it. If we look closely enough, we can still see the glow. The listener's dream. As you rest, imagine standing in a vast cathedral. The stones rise around you, the air is thick with silence. Somewhere above, a single candle flickers. Around you are shadows, not empty, but alive with memory. You cannot see them clearly, but you sense their presence. This is the Dark Ages, not a void, but a veil. Not absence, but concealment. And perhaps, as we listen carefully, we may begin to lift that veil, one fragment at a time. We have walked together through shadows, across centuries of silence, through myths and ruins, through chronicles that whisper more by what they omit than by what they tell. Now, in this final meditation, let us gather the threads, and ask what the story of the Dark Ages truly means. The nature of the cover-up. When we speak of a cover-up, we often imagine a single act, a conspiracy decided in secret chambers. But the Dark Ages suggest something different. Here the cover-up may not have been one act, but thousands of small acts. A book not copied, a chronicle altered, a temple destroyed, a language dismissed, a memory forbidden. Each act alone seems minor. Together, they reshape history. What we inherit today is not a complete story, but a curated version designed by centuries of rulers, priests, and chroniclers. The darkness is not the absence of light, but the control of light. The fabric of silence. Think of history as a tapestry. Some threads are bright, others muted, and vast sections are missing altogether. In their place, silence has been woven. This silence is not neutral. It is structured. It hides certain truths and magnifies others. The silence of the Dark Ages hides the persistence of pagan traditions, the knowledge of women healers, the sciences preserved outside Europe, the stories of ordinary people. It magnifies the authority of kings, the miracles of saints, the necessity of the Church. The result is a fabric of memory that looks whole from afar, but upon closer inspection reveals its gaps. The shadow of time. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that time itself was altered. If the phantom time hypothesis holds any truth, then centuries may have been fabricated. Even if not, the manipulation of calendars, festivals, and chronology shows us that time was not fixed. It was flexible, a tool of control. Imagine living in a world where time itself is uncertain, where the year may not be what you are told, where the past may be shorter or longer than you believe. Such a thought unsettles the ground beneath our feet. It reminds us that even the most basic structures of history may not be what they seem. The global perspective. Looking beyond Europe, we see that the so-called Dark Ages were not dark everywhere. In Africa, Asia, and the Islamic world, knowledge flourished. The darkness, then, was a choice, a narrative constructed to serve the idea of Europe's rebirth. By dimming the light of others, Europe's own renaissance appeared brighter. This is perhaps the greatest cover-up of all, not only the suppression of knowledge within Europe, but the minimization of the knowledge outside it. By pretending the world was dark, later powers could claim they had brought the light. The legacy of the cover-up. Why does this matter today? Because the stories we tell about the past shape the world we live in now. If we believe there was 1,000 years of ignorance, we accept too easily the authority of those who claim to save us from darkness. If we recognize that knowledge was hidden, not lost, then we see power differently. We learn to ask, who benefits from the story we are told? Who decides what we remember and what we forget? The legacy of the Dark Ages is not only in ruins and manuscripts. It is in the habit of questioning. It teaches us to listen not only to what is said, but to what is left unsaid. The listener's reflection. As you drift deeper into rest, imagine yourself holding a manuscript. Its pages are faded, its words fragmented. Some lines are clear, others smudged, others missing. You turn the pages slowly, realizing that the book in your hands is history itself. You cannot read the whole story, but you can sense the story that lies beneath the surface. The Dark Ages whisper to us still, not with clarity, but with hints and shadows. They invite us to wonder, to imagine, to seek. And in that seeking, perhaps we draw closer to truth. The gentle conclusion. Now, let your body grow heavy, your breath slow, your mind calm. The questions of history can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, let them drift like smoke into the air. Perhaps the cover-up will never be fully revealed. Perhaps the silence will never be fully broken. Yet even so, we have walked together through the shadows, and in doing so, we have brought light into the darkness. Rest now, knowing that the mysteries of the past are not gone. They are waiting, patiently, in ruins, in myths, in forgotten books, waiting for the day when they will be remembered again.